Welcome, Hearthstone friends. I hope you've had a fulfilling week and are ready for some cozy Friday night Hearthstone. As always, I'm your host, Opposition. Tonight, we've got a very special guest joining us. He's our reigning North American champion and all around great guy. Welcome, Thunder. It's good to have you here.
Thanks, Opposition. Yeah, good to join the show.
Now, I always like to start off with a couple of little bit more personal questions before we go into the actual deck building. Give the players a little chance to know about the person that maybe you got a lot of fans out there. So, how long have you played Hearthstone for?
Played since the beginning. I'm a fellow boomer as yourself. So, um, yeah, played from release or near from release, probably through till about 2017. I think Knights of the Frozen Throne or maybe Kobolds and Catacombs were probably the last sets I played regularly.
And did you
Uh,
ever have like a favorite expansion during that time?
Probably next Ragnaros. Yeah, they all kind of blend into one. But I remember Mad Scientist being a really cool card. So I was a free to play. So I think the first decks I played were Tempo Mage and Mid Range Hunter because they didn't have any epics required.
Yeah.
And I remember grinding a little bit of arena to try and like save dust to craft high main, that kind of thing. But yeah, those probably Undertaker Hunter was the first deck I hit Legend with.
That's awesome. So you got Legend pretty early when you were playing. That's really cool. It took me like years and years to finally get to Legend. Um,
Yeah, one of my goals that kept me playing for a while was to hit Legend with every class. Um,
have you done it?
so yeah, so eventually I did that, and I was never like a top level player. I might have hit Legend like top 200 once or twice, but um, no, once I did that, I was mainly just playing Freeze Mage and popped in every couple of years to play some more Freeze Mage. It's probably my favorite deck throughout the lifetime of Hearthstone.
Was Freeze Mage one of the decks that got you really interested in playing Classic? I know it's kind of the format that you stick to now. Was that kind of the deck that made the decision for you?
Actually, I had been playing a lot of Battlegrounds when it came out, and yeah, been playing. I think I hit 10 or 11k elo in that, but they kept introducing a lot of new minions and new heroes and things, and I just didn't have a lot of time and didn't really like all the change. So that's kind of what when I started playing Classic. Yeah, I think I just prefer that more stable meta, or the meta that kind of evolves naturally rather than having a lot of artificial changes all the time.
Yeah, definitely a lot of forced changes. Cards are introduced. You craft the cards,
Mm,
and then they get nerfed or just go out of the rotation. And yeah, it can feel like it's if you're not a player that plays every single day. If you're maybe a couple times a month player, it gets kind of overwhelming, right? So classic, like what you've got is what you get
yeah,
to play with forever. Yeah.
I think it's the personality as well. Like, I mean, the other game I've followed for like 20 years is Brood War, same as yourself, and that's the similar where you've got a very stable meta that just evolves slowly
We
and can be quite interesting, but in a different way than all the flashy new cards and things like that.
yeah. I would be happy to turn this into like a 2 hour cast of us discussing Brood War as well. That's something that's near and dear to my heart. Absolutely huge Brood War fan. Have continued to watch that professionally for a long time. But we're here to talk about Hearthstone. You participate in a couple of these classic Hearthstone Discord tournaments. You've done really well in them. In December, we hosted our largest tournament to date, which you won with Malygos Druid as part of your lineup. Do you feel like there's a difference between how you approach tournament play as opposed to kind of how you approach the ladder?
I don't think there's a huge difference. So I tend to just play the decks I'm comfortable with, which which kind of forms the basis of my lineup. So I think I brought the same 4 or 5 classes to every tournament, and then once I've chosen the decks, then or the classes, I kind of think, how can I tailor this to the band format? And I realize with the classes I like to play that um, that banning Druid is a good option. And I don't mind playing against the Rogue. So that's with the likes of like Freeze Mage and the Crusher Hunter.
And Malygos Druid, of course. Fitting
Malygos Druid.
Yeah.
So I think maybe the first tournament I played a regular combo Druid. And that was around the time I was starting to play Malygos Druid on ladder as well. And part of the reason is because I kind of had a ceiling with combo Druid where win rate against Rogue was like 35% or something like that. And I was trying to look for ways to play more of a fun deck, because regular combo Druids, there's not many choices. You're just kind of dropping minions. You might have 2 choices each turn. But that's probably the similarity is trying to improve the Rogue matchup, and Malygos Druid is better against Rogue.
Now, do you feel like this is a deck that's likely to be more successful when you're in a tournament situation, or is Malygos Druid something that is just kind of a universal deck that we can ladder with?
I would say it's a universal deck. It's very flexible. You can build it in different ways. The way I generally play it is to accentuate its strengths against aggro and against Miracle Rogue. But you can definitely build it against more of a slower meta. Add some more minions, remove Doomsayers, things like that. It's nice because you feel like you have a chance against every class. It doesn't really have any overly weak matchups, and it's very flexible.
Yeah, it's something. A flexible deck is something that can help on the ladder, but when you have a couple of tech spots that are open in a deck, typically I feel like those decks are best in tournaments where you can just say, hey, here are 3 slots, and I can pretty much put whatever I want in there to feel like I can be confident against whatever class I'm not banning, whether it's Rogue or whether it's Druid.
Yeah, but I think on ladder you kind of do that anyway. You identify the meta that you're playing in, and then you adjust your deck.
Absolutely.
There's probably a few decks like Zoo where you can just play the same 30 cards no matter what's going on. But so in that way, ladder is a little bit similar to the tournaments as well. You can change out cards depending on what you think you're playing against.
Yeah, it feels like it almost changes nightly. Like you log in, you play your first 4 or 5 games, and you kind of establish what the meta is and what players are online tonight and who you're likely to face, and maybe kind of tailor your deck a little bit around that. All right, well, let's take a look at what cards we've got in here. So Malygos Druid, for those of you who are maybe newer to Classic or haven't heard about this deck before, this is a variant of Combo Druid, so it does play the Force of Nature Savage Roar combo. It's a Combo Druid that makes some cuts to ramp a little bit faster, cycle a little bit more, and also plays this Malygos Moonfire package as well. So I always like to start with the most core cards, the most maybe core package, I guess we could say. Where do you think we should start building this deck?
Start with the win condition, which is the combo. That's how you want to win most of your games. I'd say it's even more of a combo Druid than a regular combo Druid, if that makes sense.
Yeah, explain that a little bit to us.
So it doesn't. The Malygos Druid cuts a lot of the kind of mid-sized minions, so it doesn't have a lot of threats, which means you really need that combo or even a double combo to close out the game more often. You can't just rely on kind of grinding out with value-oriented minions and things. That's against slower matchups, and against faster matchups you can just try and outvalue and survive, and Druid has a lot of tools for that. But definitely combo I would say is the most important part of the deck.
Yeah, so counting here, we've got 2 Force of Nature Savage Roars. Each one of those will do 14 damage, so that's 28 total burn that we've got just between these 4 cards, which is pretty significant. Now, most of the time Druid just whacks face with one other minion, and then they're set up for their combo. Now this deck has an alternate way to do that as well, to kind of set somebody in that 14 HP life total range. And what exactly is that package that we use?
Well, you don't necessarily are putting them in that 14 HP. I would say 22 HP is the key, and you need Innervate to do that. So that would be the next card.
That's a pretty good one. Yeah, Innervate.
Yeah, so that can pump up your combo with 2 Savage Roars in one turn to 22 damage.
Hmm. So we're left with just about 8 damage that we need to deal to face. That's not a whole lot.
Yeah,
That's a couple
yeah,
minion whacks on the board. Do you find
yep,
yourself a lot
exactly.
of times trying to hold Innervate in maybe situations where it's like you could play a minion, Innervate out another minion? Do you sometimes wait with that Innervate and think, oh, okay, I can also use this for Force of Nature, double roar?
Yeah, I think the usage of Innervate is the biggest difference between regular Druid and the Malygos Druid. You're often holding Innervate, particularly in the slower matchups, and the reason for that is you don't have those early minions to innovate out, or if you do, you won't have a follow up. So you might innovate a Sen'jin, but then you'll just pass the next turn. That's not really it's not very mana efficient or playing to you, smoothing out the curve. Um, I think that's a concept which is kind of key to Druid players, because you have these kind of innovate, which you can cheat the regular mana progression. You kind of have to smooth out your usage of mana.
Yeah, there's another concept as well that in the context of chess it's very applicable, but I think also in Hearthstone
Mm.
is if you use both of your innervates early on in the game, maybe to get a little bit more presence on the board or something, your opponent no longer has to calculate being within that 22 damage range. Instead, they're just calculating, can I die to 14 damage? And essentially, in order to do that, all they have to do is stay at 15 health. But if they know that you might have the Innervate in your hand, they always have to play a little bit more
Mm.
carefully, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you know, sometimes you just don't have a win. Maybe against Control Warrior or something. The Innovate is your win condition, so it's worthwhile holding on to it. It's part of the combo in that respect. Like, just as you'd keep a Savage Roar. I mean, you can use Savage Roar and Force of Nature for removal as well.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly the one copy of Force of Nature. It's pretty useful removal card, especially against Zoo.
Yeah, absolutely. Being able to take out 2 health minions like Flame Imp and Knife Juggler with Force of Nature when you may not have something like a Spell Power Swipe
Mm.
available. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit more about this ramp package. We've got Wild Growth. That makes sense. Doesn't require too much explanation. It's a Druid deck and classic. But we also play Nourish as well, which is not
Yeah.
a card that's commonly seen in normal combo Druids. So tell us a little bit about your choice to play Nourish here.
Yeah, so if your win condition is combo, you want to ramp into it and draw into it as fast as possible, because you can't win those grindy value games. Excuse me, I'll just have some water.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I think that's an important differentiation here between the regular Druid decks and this one, is that you play fewer threats and fewer minions. And the trade off for that is that we do get to play cards like Nourish. In a slower matchup, being able to play
Mm.
Nourish is really nice, right? Because you may know that your medium sized threat will just get removed efficiently. Instead, just
Yeah,
ramping past somebody who's holding a handful of removal, right, that sets us up for stronger turns in the future.
yeah. I mean, drawing 3 cards is very powerful in the late game. You draw into win conditions, or you draw into something you need to prevent lethal from the opponent, a taunt or a BGH or something like that. And then against the slower decks, like decks that don't play for the board in the first few turns, rogue or warrior, um, yeah, they're not playing anything, and then you just get to ramp for free without any real loss of tempo.
Yeah, and there's another thing I kind of wanted to touch on here with ramp as well, because I think sometimes the concept of ramping can be misunderstood by some players. Just because we get Wild Growth in our starting hand doesn't mean that we always play Wild Growth on 2. If we're facing an aggressive deck, we may be much better off even using a hero power to remove something or playing Wrath. For example, somebody coins out a Knife Juggler and we hold Wrath and Wild Growth in hand. We're probably more likely to want to kill the Knife Juggler because ramping doesn't really mean anything if it means that we aren't able to
Mm.
capture the board later, right?
Yeah, against the fast decks that play on the board, having tempo is the most important. Um, yeah, one of the things with Druid, a regular combo Druid, if you fall behind on the board, there's no, it's very difficult to recover. One of the nice things about the Malygos Druid is it has a few options with the synergies with spell power and removal to actually swing the board. in cards like Doomsayer as well to come back and recover tempo.
Yeah, let's add this Malygos to the deck and talk about it a little bit here, because unlike maybe some of the standard or wild Malygos variants where they're true OTK decks, this one is not using Malygos in order to just kill our opponent. So we got a few cards. We've got Malygos. I'll put in a couple of these other spell power and spell cards. Maybe you can describe what is the role of Malygos in this deck.
It's just fun to play a big minion that does lots of damage. Yeah, it's actually one of the least critical parts of the deck, I would say. Maybe like the 28th card, something like that. Most of the time it's dead in your hand, and it's quite a weak top deck as well. But if you do get it to stick, or you compare it with like an Innervate Wrath or a Moonfire, if you drop Malygos and Moonfire, a Druid of the Claw, say, against Druid, then you've just catapulted ahead because you've removed their minion and you've established a minion that they can't remove easily.
Right. Even if they silence it, it's still a 4/12, which is an enormous body in the mirror. You think a creature like Karen is a very good one in Druid Mirror, while a silenced Malygos is even stronger than Karen still. So
yeah, so it's quite good against Druid, against Freeze Mage. They don't have good ways to remove it. It doesn't do a lot in most matchups.
Yeah.
Sorry to disappoint.
It is kind of the signature card of the deck, but
it's
not the centerpiece of the deck, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've even thought about dropping it completely and just playing Ken or something, but then it's less fun.
Right. So. Well, the Moonfires get less value as well. Now, Moonfire, a card that can do 6 damage for 0 mana. One of the things that I like about this Malygos plus Moonfire combo is that a lot of times the downside of playing one of these big creatures on 9 like Ysera is that they come into play and they absolutely are guaranteed not to do anything the first turn they come into play, which is just not helpful, right? Or usually is losing against strong decks. When we have Moonfire in hand on turn 9, or probably on like turn 6 because we're playing Druid, on 9 mana, we can play Malygos Moonfire, and it actually does do something once it comes into play. It can swing the board and establish a threat, which is what we're always kind of trying to do with a Druid deck, right? We want to always kind of try and swing it and put something out there that's big and awkward for them to deal with.
Yeah, exactly. Anytime you can stick a minion, you're threatening lethal with combo from hand. I will say though, with Moonfire, I would almost never save it for Malygos. Generally, it's good enough to pair it with. With either a swipe or, because sometimes you can't remove everything cleanly with swipe, and it's more important to remove the board earlier, or with a Drake or something.
Yeah, when we're on turn 4, facing a zoo deck with a good start, they may have a couple of 2 health minions on the board, and it's maybe one thing I would like to dispel that any viewers might have of like, oh, we play Malygos, so the Moonfire goes with the Malygos. Like I said before, unlike the standard or wild variants of Moonfire and Malygos, we're not using it to OTK, and we don't even really have to use this with Malygos. It's a very flexible card that can just be a 1 damage ping for 0, right? Similar to Hunter's Mark, it can do 9 damage to an Ancient of War, but sometimes we just need a 0 mana card to do 1 damage to something.
Yeah, it's great on its own, and you can do like a turn 2 play. You can play Wild Growth and remove the Elephant Gnome. It's just such a strong play.
Right.
Or even like a Hero Power Moonfire to remove a Juggler or something like that.
Yeah, and we have also Thalnos, which doesn't really make too much of an appearance in normal Druid lists, or it's one of those cards that's maybe like, 30th card kind of choice. But in this deck, having the 2 Moonfires allows us to establish Thalnos on a turn where on turn 2 we can play Thalnos plus Moonfire and clear a Juggler, and on turn 4 we can do something like Thalnos, Wrath, and Moonfire and basically clear off all of the things that are annoying to us.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The addition of just Moonfire seems to make it worthwhile to run all of the spell power synergy. It makes you add Thalnos, and then the Thalnos makes the Wrath stronger, and then Wrath is really nice with Drake, that kind of thing. So it all synergizes together really nicely.
Yeah, there's also the Death Rattle here. We've got the Death Rattle on Thalnos to cycle a card, so probably going to do something the turn he comes into play, because you can even play him on 2 without an Innervate. cast a spell still, right? We don't have to Innervate out Wrath or something.
Mm.
And Azure Drake, same thing, right? It draws us a card when we bring it into play. So all of these good spell damage minions also happen to be the ones that cycle through our deck and get us to the combo more quickly.
Yeah, and with cards with the ramping like Nourish, it allows it becomes more feasible to do plays like Drake swipe or Thalnos swipe, which is usually just a complete board removal and establishing a minion. It's a really strong play.
Yeah, the Thalnos swipe is another one that I think is really important here. Whereas normally we don't have always great ways to deal with zoo boards, especially if a human being is playing it and they happen to have minions that have greater than 1 HP, not just like a Dark Iron Dwarf and a bunch of 2/1s. Then Thalnos becomes really good against those zoo decks that maybe normally a druid wouldn't have the tools for. A regular swipe isn't going to do the trick, but Thalnos, maybe Innervate swipe or just Thalnos swipe on whatever turn, can do a lot more to clear off some of those sticky minions from zoo players or other aggressive decks.
Yeah, it gives you a reason to save swipe as long as possible as well. One thing I see some druid players doing is playing swipe at the first opportunity. And it's one of those cards that every opponent's going to be trying to play around against a druid. And in this kind of deck, you have options to make it even more powerful if you do draw into that Thalnos.
Yeah, I think it's another case of the threat being stronger than the execution. Is that if we have one AoE removal in the deck, we're not playing Starfall. If that one AoE removal is swipe, and our opponent's always going to be playing against swipe because every druid plays swipe, then they're always going to be building their board in a certain way, which means that sometimes they make concessions in order to do that, right? They push less face damage or whatever it is. They play a big minion instead of playing two smaller minions because they're afraid of swipe. The longer we keep this in our hand, the more they have to play around it and the more subpar decisions they're going to have to make.
And what happens at some point is they decide you don't have it in hand and then overcommit.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Even at the higher levels, the hand reading is an important part of being a competitive Hearthstone player, right? Is that you have to be making inferences about what you think the opponent has in their hand. And, I'll certainly be the first to admit that a lot of times my first impression of, oh, they don't have swipe, I will flood the board. And exactly like you say, play right into a swipe, just clearing everything cleanly. Now we also got Wrath in here. Wrath seems like sort of an auto-include with this much spell damage. Not a face damage spell, not anymore at least. But a good way to cycle this 1 damage cycling to draw a card. It's always strong as sort of a ping, but being able to do 2 damage, sometimes we just think, oh, it's just +1 damage, but it's double damage, essentially, and cycling a card. So Wrath seems like another really strong fit with all of these spell damage.
It also pairs well with Nourish. You can ramp into Nourish and it gives you 2 extra mana crystals straight away. So against like Rogue, you could Nourish and remove their SI7 in the same turn.
And there are a couple other minions that this does well against as well when we compare it with like Thalnos or with Drake. We've got like Dark Iron Dwarf. Any Azure Drake is another target that we can hit with this. So there are a few different ways that we can use Wrath with spell power to clear kind of commonly seen minions as well.
Yeah, playing Drake and then wrathing their Drake for 4 is quite.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Puts a smile on your face.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes, with these spell power minions, we can think of the one damage spell power, how that affects it, which is good. But I've noticed in playing this deck more and more, sometimes if they leave a Drake up, we might end up playing like Thalnos Swipe, and that's just like a guaranteed board clear, right? Is that if they can't answer one of these spell damage minions, we're likely to be able to play another one and play something crazy like Wrath to cycle for 3, right?
Yeah, or you could have a Drake on the board and then play Thalnos Wrath for 5 against an Ancient of Law.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
Yeah.
2 mana to remove a 7-cost minion.
And, speaking of Azure Drake in this situation, we don't play any other 5-drop minions in this deck. We do play Nourish, which is a spell, though. In certain decks, I noticed that top players will hold on to the Drake in order to get value out of the spell damage, whereas in like Rogue, a lot of times you just play the Drake out because you just want to play a minion, play something on the board and cycle. Do you feel like you hold Azure Drake even if you could commit it to the board to wait for maybe getting more value out of its spell damage?
Sometimes against certain matchups, maybe like against like a mid-range shaman, where you know they're just going to remove it anyway. But typically it's the other way around. I'll play the Drake and save the swipe for later, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's often better to play something on the board, draw, um, than because that's proactive play, rather than say if you've got swipe and Drake in hand, just swiping and then yeah.
Yeah, you don't.
So yeah, it's kind of situational. Often you do need to play it because you don't have any other 5 drops, but sometimes you do want to save it for that combo with swipe.
Yeah, speaking of 5 drops here, Druid of the Claw. This is a card that has just kind of been a perennial addition to a lot of Druid decks, and we don't play it in here. I would say we essentially substitute Nourish for this card. Do you feel like this deck is at more of a disadvantage because it doesn't run Druid of the Claw, or do you just not miss it?
I would love to play it. I would love to play it over Sen'jin. Actually, I would say that's the substitution. Is um, it's more flexible than Sen'jin because it's got more hit points, but you can also charge it.
Mm-hmm.
But you have a problem with the 4 slot then, um, because you need something to play after a wild growth. And if everything's a five cost Drakes and Druid of the Claws and Nourishes and things, yeah, it's just you need that to smooth the curve a bit better, and that's the reason to play Sen'jin over Druid of the Claw really.
Right, and we're not playing Chillwind Yeti either in this deck, which is not seen in every combo Druid deck. That doesn't include Malygos either, but it's still seen a fair amount as kind of a filler and just giving some consistency to regular Druid decks that want to play Wild Growth and guarantee something on 4. So without Chillwind Yeti and without Druid of the Claw, we do set ourselves behind a little bit in the Druid mirror, right?
Yeah, yeah, the Druid Mirror is an interesting one. I feel like it should be a weak matchup, but I seem to do all right in it. Um, I think it's around mulliganing really aggressively for that wild growth and getting ahead that way, and
Right.
then having the swing turn. Um, it's interesting because I in the early days I played Yeti instead of Sen'jin, but Sen'jin does actually have a lot of benefit when it's played later in the game. It can really mess up like hunters or rogues. Um, you can nourish into it and play it, and it can buy you an extra turn to draw your own lethal.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and I think the one that's not always taken to heart by players, that your taunts don't have to come down early. In fact, if you play taunt after taunt after taunt, you run the risk of just running out of taunts. Sometimes, if we had something like Yeti in the deck, it would be better to place the Yeti down, even against a Zoo deck, because we want to put taunts up when we're actually in danger. Right? They have slightly lower stats. We want to use that at some point to close out the game rather than to just put it on the board as fodder.
Yeah, it's interesting, particularly against like say Miracle Rogue. If you play it on 4, they have so many ways to remove it.
Right.
So if you play it later in the game, they're getting ready to Leroy you, and they might have already used their deadly poisons and their SIs and things like that. So even though they've drawn most of the deck, they actually have in some cases fewer options
Yeah, and
to remove it.
against Rogue, it also does it's really an economy of turns toward the end of the game, right? Is that if they can, they'll have Leroy, Shadow Step, Cold Bloods, and stuff in hand. They just need to hit that turn when they can play it. And delaying them by even 1 turn by just putting down a Sen'jin, forcing them to play a Sap, which takes 2 mana, which, would essentially be another Leroy charge. It can buy you that 1 crucial turn that you need to do whatever you need to do, whether it's find another taunt or just kill them with a combo.
Yeah, it's surprising how much of a difference it makes over Yeti in some of those matchups. But yeah, against like Warrior or Druid, you would rather have a Yeti, I'd say.
Right.
And you can certainly build it that way if you want to.
Yeah, I would say we can discuss in a little bit here some of the flexible slots that we can use to change, but I would say definitely Sen'jin seems like one that even it's even possible maybe like you were saying to include 1 or 2 druids of the claw instead of a Sen'jin. couple other strong druid minions that sort of show up perennially here. Keeper of the Grove. I think this one sort of speaks for itself. Always good and helpful for board control. It helps us fill up that 4 slot as well, so that we feel confident that after we wild growth we have something to play on the next turn. Creates
Yeah, I mean, in my
swing
opinion,
turns.
it's one of the best cards in all of Classic. Is Keeper of the Grove.
I would agree.
It's so strong against aggro and against control decks as well with the silence ability.
Right.
Always find a use for it.
Yeah, I sometimes see people playing in slower matchups and they'll play Keeper of the Grove, and just because it's a minion and they want to put something on the board, they'll just play it out. But these come into play effects. No matter what deck you're playing against, it almost always will have insane value, whether it's innervated out to kill a knife juggler and then trade off 2 other minions, or whether it's used late game to like silence Tyrion or Sylvanas so that we can actually get on the board and do something. Just all around really strong card. And
Yeah, I feel like even if you're playing something like Murloc Druid, you'd still be playing that card, Keeper of the Grove.
Yeah, exactly. um,
And then same with Ancient of the Law.
Yeah.
It's such a good card.
Exactly. Cycling is always going to be strong for us, especially since we play cards like Nourish. This is just the perfect card to reload. If we Nourish into Ancient of Lore, we're drawing the cards back that we're drawing 1 card back at least that we lost from Nourish, and also putting a 5/5 threat on the board, so actually rewarding ourselves with a body for ramping as well. And of course, later in the game, this 5 health restore just amazing too.
Yeah, and that's one of the ways you can get into trouble in the deck is if you play all your ramp and then you've got no cards in hand.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's when Ancient of Law comes really in handy.
Now we do have one Ancient of War. Sometimes we see combo Druid players playing 1 copy, 2 copies of this. It's also possible not to put this in a standard combo list, but it's not included in this Malygos list. Do you feel like the deck struggles a little bit without having this 10 HP of Taunt, or do you not miss it?
I don't actually play this card in regular Druid lists, although I know it has uses in certain matchups, but I just don't like getting Black Knighted or silenced or that kind of thing. You definitely could play it because it's nice to have another big body when you've got a deck with Nourish to get out early. So I could see it being tested out, but yeah, it's just not generally a card I favour.
Yeah, against Zoo, it's not really part of our plan to be taunting up to win. We're not playing the board game quite as much as far as putting minions on the board. We're a little bit more reactionary. So I could see this not perfectly fitting the theme. But in certain circumstances, if you're facing a lot of Zoo bots and they're not playing Owl in those decks, which most of them don't, or just real life players, they don't necessarily play a lot of Owls in aggressive decks.
Yeah.
This can be just a game-winning card, right?
I think you kind of hit the nail there on the head. It's with the Malygos, you're not really fighting for board. You're ramping, falling behind on tempo, and then trying to set up the swing turns with a big spell power removal, spell power plus removal, rather than the kind of contesting the board with big taunts. It's a different playstyle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is slightly different. I think for anybody that's familiar with combo Druid and standard combo Druid, it's probably familiar to just kind of, I don't want to say mindlessly, but just sort of play any minion that we can on curve. I think there's a little bit more planning that goes into this. Probably a little bit more fine-tuned mulligan decisions, such as when do we keep Nourish, when do we we always keep Wild Growth, but what kinds of things do we want to keep? What's the value of Moonfire in certain matchups?
You often have a really large hand and a lot of different options, and you're trying to think, do I want to use the swipe now or next turn, or what am I going to combo with the Moonfire, or what turn am I going to play Nourish?
Right.
There's a bit more thinking involved in with the large hand sizes and cheap spells and things.
So we got a couple of tech choices here at the end. We got 26 out of 30 cards. Let's take a look first at these at kind of the anti-aggro list. This is the one that you played in the tournament. So we've got 1 copy of Doomsayer here. We had Explain this card. We got one copy of it. Is it possible to run two copies? Why do we run it? Typically, you wouldn't see a druid running Doomsayer because they're always trying to put more minions on the board. But explain this one just a little bit to us.
Yeah, I often play with two copies. It's better versus obviously against aggressive decks versus like a Kian or something. So it gives you just another early game option. It can soak up 7 damage. It's like 2 manas, gain 7 life
Right.
against aggro decks, which is pretty strong anyway. And it's actually quite. You can use it to control tempo early in the game versus say a handlock or a rogue. You can actually prevent them executing their game plan. So if you play at turn 3 against a handlock, they now can't play their Drake or their Giant on turn 4.
Yeah, I have to say, I think that this card is a little bit underrated. It's one that I've had a lot of success with in Handlock myself. And you wouldn't think that normally in the mirror this is necessarily something you want, but like you mentioned, there are certain turns if you're a player that understands what your opponent's deck is, can identify what their threat is going to be or what their natural game plan is. And so the example you give, Handlock, it's going from turn 3 into turn 4. That means Twilight Drake or Mountain Giants coming down. If we play Doomsayer, we sometimes even have those turns where the opponent ends up with 4 mana and they have to just play coin and pass to stop their hand from from overdrawing. I played a game. Oh gosh, I think it was day before yesterday. It was a Druid mirror. They were kind of a standard combo Druid, and at some point they just kind of got behind on the board. They cleared something, then they put Doomsayer down, and I had Malygos in hand. I had all these finishers like Malygos Ancient Allure with plenty of mana, and I couldn't do anything. Right, and they just came back on the board and played something stronger. It was really hard for me to get back in the game. So I think that Doomsayer can be a very good tempo card. Sometimes with decks like Malygos Druid, we end up with 2 mana left over at the end of a turn. We don't, we swipe hero power to clear a board, and we don't have anything else to play. And Doomsayer can come in super handy there.
Yeah, it goes really well with Nourish as well if you ramp the 2 extra crystals.
Yeah.
And even if you know they're going to remove it, it's basically ramping up, healing for 7. And then you're ahead in mana, so you can execute those kind of Drake swipes to then come back.
Yeah, and
it's kind of like buys you time.
Yeah, and while it doesn't necessarily give us mana this turn, you could conceptualize it as if the opponent if we play a bunch of removal and then finish it off with a Doomsayer, then our next turn, we've essentially just given ourselves a free turn's worth of mana, right? By playing the Doomsayer for 2 on 1 turn, we guarantee that we'll have a clean board that we can start dropping creatures on for the next turn. So, in some ways, Doomsayer, in certain situations, if they don't have a silence or something else, Doomsayer can buy us like basically 10 mana, a full 10 mana turn, which is insane.
Yeah, that's crazy. If it stays up and you have, you can drop an Ancient of Law the next turn or something, then yeah, it's very strong. Yeah.
Okay, so we got Harrison Jones in here as well. Do you feel like weapon classes are typically something that this deck tends to struggle with?
No, Harrison's quite a specific inclusion, I'd say, for say the meta at the top of the ladder, or in the tournament. So I brought it to the tournament because I was banning Druid and typically classes like Shaman, Paladin, Hunter are more represented in the tournaments. But also at the top of the ladder, there's kind of a meta around playing Miracle Rogue and countering Miracle Rogue, which is a lot of aggressive decks that play weapons.
Yeah.
So it's kind of it's really strong against Hunter and Shaman. It's finds a use against Rogue even just to draw a card or 2, quite helpful.
And
yeah, it just sucks against Zoo and against Druid. Yeah, Warlock and Druid.
Would you ever consider Swamp Ooze instead? Or do you feel like the cycle that we get from Harrison and the 5-slot mana requirement where it can put a little bit more consistent minion in there? Do you feel, which one, what do you feel are the trade-offs here?
Well, I think in Malygos Druid, you have a lot of mana, and you don't have a lot of those mid-sized threats, so it's not taking up another slot, really. I mean, maybe you could play like Druid of the Claw, but the other thing is because you're playing a combo-oriented deck, the draw is just as useful as the weapon removal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
absolutely. And like you mentioned, after ramping, when we play cards like Nourish, there is a downside to this. If we play our first Nourish and we have one or two wild growths in our starting hand, it can feel like we already won the game. But we also have the possibility to draw into a bunch of four drops that our turns now become 8 mana, play Sen'jin, hero power pass, which is not very powerful, or dump minions from hand and end up with nothing left. So Harrison, I think, goes a little bit better with Nourish because we're going to be ramping really hard and we do need to draw
yeah,
a refill.
I think word of caution on Harrison is not to overvalue it as well. Like you typically you don't want to keep it against classes like Rogue or Warrior. It's much more important to get your ramp,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's better to top deck Harrison later. Um, the only classes where I'd want to keep it in the opening hand is maybe Hunter or Shaman that runs Doomhammer.
Yeah, I would have to say, hunters that kind of walk that really fine line between can they do enough damage to you before you just, roll over them. That three attack bow, especially when they've got a secret up, and especially if that secret is strong against Druid, something like Freezing Trap. Harrison just so strong at countering the hunter's game plan and their just general ability to control the board. Their hero power doesn't control the board.
Yeah. But
Uh,
yeah, just circling back, it's definitely a tech card. It's not a necessity in the deck.
how do you feel about Karen and Sylvanas?
I think Ken is very useful because it's sticky and allows you to threaten your combo. Um, I basically it's weak against Rogue because of Sap,
Mm-hmm.
so that's why I don't play it. But it's definitely very strong against like Warrior Druid. Um, yeah, I'd prefer to because you're not really contesting board as much. I think it's um, Sylvanas isn't as strong, so I'd prefer Kian to Sylvana because you just want a minion to stick for one turn, and then you can just play combo.
Exactly.
Whereas Sylvanas is easier to remove.
Right. Exactly. Sylvanas can maybe in some cases be stronger against decks like Warrior or somebody who's playing Ragnaros. I could see that, but nonetheless, I think that it's because we don't usually have a reliable way to kill our own Sylvanas, it might just come too late for us to actually use that Sylvanas and get value out of it against a slower deck.
Yeah, and against Rag, I prefer BGH
Right.
anyway
Right.
than Sylvanas.
And speaking of the big man himself, Ragnaros seems like a pretty natural inclusion here. Big minion that affects the board the turn he comes in, gives us some chances against Miracle Rogue, and can get somebody within combo range, right?
Yeah, even if it hits face when you don't want it to, it's still putting them in range 22. But mainly it's strong against Rogue, particularly if you can ramp early. You can even drop it on their auctioneer turn.
Yeah, and it's one of those minions that is, you'd think normally an 8 mana minion you really don't want to get that sapped, but Ragnaros not so bad because it has essentially a come into play effect of dealing 8 damage. So if Rogue wants to sap this for one turn and they still need their gadgets in concealed for the next turn to draw the rest of their deck, we get another chance to play it, right? So not a bad card at all to include.
Yeah.
And then I think our last card here, our last tech card, is BGH. Do you feel like this is a card you would ever want to swap out for another 3 drop or something else like maybe Druid of the Claw? Or is this a pretty important inclusion?
I mean, it's a tech card, but I would always include it. I mean, you don't really have any single target removal, and it's very strong against handlock. It kind of swings the matchup in your favor and against Warrior. Um, they have a lot of targets for it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and you can just play it as a 3 mana 4/2 as well. If you're trying to set up a combo or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just a good card. Um,
Yeah. It's one additional chance that we have to maybe kill an overeager Edwin early on as well. Just being able to have that
yes,
BGH. Again, the threat stronger than the execution. If the opponent, especially in a tournament situation, knows that we're playing BGH, now all of a sudden that's 1/3 of our deck that can deal with Edwin, Keeper plus BGH, as opposed to 1/2 of our deck. And that's a pretty big proportional difference. when we're talking about somebody who can all-in you and just win on turn 3 or turn 4. Now there are a couple other choices I wanted to ask you about here also. Earthen Ring Farseer and Harvest Golem, they're not always included in combo druid lists. We're pretty skimpy on the 3 slot here, and we've added some 5-drops, or about the same number of 5-drops. Do you feel like there's ever a situation in which you want to include something like Earthen Ring Farseer or Harvest Golem in this deck?
So Earthen Ring, because you're not playing a lot of minions on the board, you don't get that effect of healing your own minions. So you just be playing it to heal face, and there's just better cards to, you're trying to draw combo, trying to gain mana and draw cards. So it doesn't do either of those. Yeah.
What about Harvest Golem?
Harvest Golem. I mean, it's a good anti-aggro card, but you've got Moonfire, you've got Doomsayer. You kind of have enough tools.
Mm-hmm.
I do like that it's sticky, but the 2 attack isn't as threatening as say a Cairn.
Right, and
yeah, it's already a really strong deck against aggro. You've got enough tools in there. Yeah, it's more about trying to balance the top end, I think, than adding more of the early game. And your 3 mana slots reserved for playing Innervate, Nourish. So.
Yeah, you're kind of famous for this thunder curve, as they call it, where every single game, it seems like, maybe every game I've played against you on the ladder, you always have Wild Growth and Nourish, and you seem to always get the coin or Innervate as well to do it.
It's probably a good segue into the mulligan choices.
Absolutely. So let's talk about some of the slower controlier decks first. When we're playing against, let's say start with Control Warrior. What are the kinds of cards that we want to keep against Control Warrior, and what's our general game plan against that kind of deck?
So I'd say Control Warrior is actually one of the weaker matchups, because they can gain life, but they can remove. They have so many ways to remove the minions you do play. But they're a slow deck at the start, so I tend to mulligan really aggressively. I want Wild Growth, and I also keep Ancient of Lore. So one of the ways to lose is just not being able to draw enough cards. So game plan against like Control Warrior is to draw your whole deck as fast as you can and combo them.
Would you say that Nourish is a card you'd want to keep against Warrior?
I would consider Nourish if I'm on coin. Yeah, but if you're playing first and you don't have Innervate, just toss it. It's better to get Wild Growth.
Mm-hmm. And you were mentioning that Harrison is usually a card that you'd want to top deck later rather than keep in your opening hand.
Yeah.
Being as Warrior is kind of a slower matchup, would you ever consider keeping Harrison maybe more against Warriors, just because it's like they'll have a Fiery War Axe up, you'll probably get value, they're not going to be doing anything proactive on the board, or is this a card that you would still kind of wait to top deck against them?
I definitely wouldn't keep it against Warrior. The thing is, like, if you say keep it and then you draw, like, I don't know, a swipe and a Moonfire, your hand's completely dead. You don't want to play it just for tempo. You're trying to get some value and draw some cards.
Right.
And also, if they don't have Fiery War Axe, their other weapon is like turn 7, Gorehell.
Right.
So yeah, I wouldn't advise keeping it. You just want Wild Growth, Ancient Lore, and Nourish if you've got it.
Yeah.
If you're on coin. Yeah.
And then probably just draw into Ancient Allure, Ragnaros, and Malygos on curve, I would assume. That seems to be how you play the deck against me.
Yeah, the thing is, you want to, once you get up to that kind of 7+ mana, you just want to play something every turn. You don't want to have any dead turns, so draw a bunch of cards and then just hit them turn after turn until they're in combo range. Yep.
Do you feel like it's a
favorite
matchup?
That's the same for other.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say it's a similar game plan for other slow decks, like Priest, but it's probably around 50-50. I'd say it's the weakest matchup for Malygos Druid of the common decks.
Control Warrior, you're saying?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
I think that normally no, most combo druid is pretty decent against control warrior, just because a control warrior doesn't have enough cycling and enough removal to deal with every single druid threat. Now this deck plays fewer minions, more spells, a little bit more flexible. So it feels like the warrior has just enough removal in hand to usually handle whatever we have that we're putting on the board. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, if the game goes on too long, they gain too much armor. They have too much removal. So it's about being fast. And cards like Doomsayer just don't do much in the matchup as well. You just got a few dead cards. Yeah, but if you include like a Ken, then it would definitely become favoured, I'd say.
So against slow decks, we always want to keep Wild Growth. That makes good sense. Keeping Ancient of Lore, you would say that holds true against Priest and mid-range Shaman, or is this a card that you might not always want to keep against the slower decks?
Only against the really slow decks. So I wouldn't keep it against mid-range Shaman.
Mm-hmm.
And you might have noticed I didn't say to keep Innervate.
Yeah.
That's because it's yeah, it's because you can innovate out of Drake or something, but you have no follow-up. So you Innovate's better for your combo against slow decks.
That's really interesting. It's honestly something, I played a lot of Druid, but I never really thought too much about trying to get that maximal value out of the Force of Nature Savage Roar combo. A lot of times I've thought, well, I'll just whatever minion you can get out there. But you're right, is that if we on turn 3 play Azure Drake and we don't have a 4-drop to follow it up, or a 4-drop isn't proactive, something like Keeper of the Grove, where we don't want to play it onto an empty board, we're not really doing ourselves any favors, right, against these slow decks by bringing out a minion for them to conveniently use a turn of removal on.
Yeah, you're not trying to beat down with minions like a regular druid.
Right.
But yeah, you keep it in most matchups against aggressive decks for sure. You want that tempo, and I'd keep it against like a mid-range Shaman. I'd keep probably Wild Growth, Innervate, and Wrath is good against Shaman.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense.
Can remove a Mana Tide or a Flame Tongue Totem.
Would you ever keep Keeper of the Grove against Shamans?
If I know it's an aggro Shaman, yes, but not against mid-range.
It doesn't line up perfectly with Shaman minions either. Things like the Wolves, they got 3 health. Keeper of the Grove is a card that wants to be played and remove the biggest threat on the board and hopes that it only has 2 HP. But yeah, Shaman it doesn't line up perfectly against. And truth be told, there's not that much to silence from Shaman early on. Maybe a Flame Tongue.
It's quite interesting. The Shaman matchup, like regular combo Druid, it's a poor matchup. But what surprised me about Malygos Druid is it's very strong against mid-range Shaman. And what I think it comes down to is you're just too fast for them with the mana ramp. Mid-range Shaman's quite slow, and by the time they get going, you've set up that swing turn with the spell power swipe. Or you can even, like the trees, Force of Nature is quite a good removal against Shaman.
Yeah, typically, the 2 reasons I think that mid-range Shaman tends to outperform Druid, and maybe you have some input on this too, but I would say number 1 is that they have totems, and the totems just line up really well with swipe. We don't really want to use 2 swipes to clear a Shaman board, and we don't really usually want to wait for Azure Drake swipe as Druid. So with a traditional Druid deck, they only have Wild Growth and Innervate to ramp. We have Nourish as well. That gets us up to maybe Azure Drake swipe. The other thing is, we have a way to conveniently deal with them on turn 6, or whenever we have 6 mana with Thalnos plus swipe. Even can include a Moonfire if there's something big in there. But Thalnos swipe, that deals with a board full of totems plus Fire Elemental, right? That's an enormous swing turn for us.
Yeah.
So we have options to clear that.
It's all about the swing turns.
Yeah.
And once the mid Shaman's lost the board, unless they've already got you low, it's usually game over.
And just looking at the list here, how many of these things are really something that wants to be hexed? When we play normal combo Druid with Karen and Sylvanas in the 6th slot, our opponent has the best hex targets in the game, essentially, with those. Ragnaros, I would even argue, isn't that strong of a hex target because cards like BGH exist. But those annoying sticky death rattle minions that so many decks have trouble dealing with, they just get around them with hex, and we don't play those minions, so they don't have an opportunity to use their hexes efficiently, they're instead going to have to use it on either Ancient of Lore, Ragnaros, or maybe Malygos.
Yeah, Ragnaros is not a card you want to be playing against Shaman, because you know that they have a hex in hand by then, and it only can clear 1 minion at a time, which, as we know, Shaman has the totem, so they're generally playing 2 or more minions each turn.
Right. And, it's not to say that Hex on Ancient of Lore is necessarily bad, but it's certainly better than relying on Sylvanas and Karen to carry some weight and then getting them hexed on turn 6. We just kind of avoid that, make it a little bit more awkward for them to deal with.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about the control matchups or the slow matchups. Let's talk about some of these faster matchups. So, in general, how would you say that this deck does against Zoo, or some of these other strongly creature-based decks, and does it do better than your average combo Druid?
Yeah, it shines against the aggressive decks. Zoo, it's not as strong as against the other aggressive decks, the aggro rogues, pallies, things like that, but it still does better against Zoo than a regular combo Druid. I'd say it's still maybe like 55, 45. Yeah, so I mean the cards you want to keep, it's like Moonfire, Innervate, Keeper, Doomsayer.
Pretty much
I tend
anything
not
with
to.
4
I
or
tend
less.
not to keep Swipe, unless I've already got some other removal. I think Swipe is just too reactive, too slow. Keeper's much better.
Yeah, I think there's always a concern of what if they run away with the board? What if they get away with murder by playing a bunch of 1/1 or 1 health minions that are easily cleared by swipe? But I think that more practically speaking, we're less concerned with a flood of 1 health minions than we are with stuff that has 2 health, which is like Knife Juggler and some of the other, things like a Flame Imp that can trade up into one of our bigger minions, like Flame Imp plus Abusive taking down a Sen'jin. So I think a lot of the times the Keeper is really there to destroy the big minion and then deal with the smaller minions using this 4 HP pool that it's got as well.
Yeah. You can also keep Wild Growth if you have some other, like a Moonfire or an Innervate or something like that, because eventually you do need to get some ramp going.
Would you?
You can't just tempo into those mid-sized minions as easily. Yeah.
So let's do an example here. Let's say that we have a choice. We have Wild Growth in our mulligan choices, and then we have a bunch of high-end stuff that we don't want to play against aggro. Would you keep the lone Wild Growth against aggro decks, or would you feel inclined to ditch that and be really looking hard for Keeper, Innervate, Moonfire?
I'd ditch the Wild Growth, yeah.
Are there... Go ahead.
I mean, against aggressive decks, you win and lose the game in the first couple of turns, so you want to maximize your odds of being able to keep up in those first few turns.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, it's tempo wars. Yeah.
How do you feel about Thalnos in your opening hand? Maybe with Moonfire, do we keep him? Without Moonfire, do we keep him? Or is he just not a card that we keep at all?
Keep him with Moonfire against aggressive decks, yeah. It's really nice. A free 2 damage spell.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So yeah, keep Thalnos if you already have a Moonfire, but I would ditch him otherwise.
Makes sense. What about like burn-oriented decks? Talking about things that have lots of charge minions like Arcane Golem, maybe Face Hunter, those the kinds of decks that maybe I would play. What's our strategy against those as far as mulligan? Is it any different? Are we looking for different cards, or are we just kind of looking for the same Keeper, Innervate, Moonfire kind of stuff?
Yeah, pretty much the same. Yeah, like it's against those decks. You want to remove their minions and then try and race them, because because the charges can still be strong late game against you if you get too low. So you want to try and establish a board as fast as possible. So yeah, Keeper's really strong, and then Sen'jin's helpful late in the game to block the charges.
Yeah, absolutely. And given a I think some people, when given a choice on 4 mana between a Keeper and a Sen'jin, some people may make the choice to put down a Sen'jin because it's got 1 extra health and guards our face now. Some people maybe put down the Keeper to remove a minion against one of these aggressive decks. I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I think almost always we want to be playing the Keeper before we play the Sen'jin.
Yeah, if you can get some value from it. I mean, you probably just want to keep a face. You can get some better use from it than that. But if they have a minion on board, then yeah, keep it first.
And Sen'jin also has an annoying amount of health for some of these decks that play Chargers. Arcane Golem doesn't quite kill it. Leroy, it overkills the Sen'jin, and if you're trying to kill somebody with Leroy, you're likely concerned with every little last point of damage that we can squeeze out. So Sen'jin later on in the game, 5 HP is actually pretty decent against these Chargers, forcing somebody to play an Abusive Sergeant with their Charger or whatever it is, waste a Leroy on it, waste 2 mana on a Sap, whatever it is. Sen'jin can become a lot more powerful as the game goes on.
Yeah.
All right. How about the $1 million question? We got Miracle Rogue and Druid. Those are kind of we've talked a little bit about Druid and Rogue, but let's talk about mulligan choices for those and just generally how those matchups go. So how about Rogue first? What do we do?
So Rogue doesn't do much in the first few turns. They might dagger and re-dagger, so you just want to get ramp, basically. And I'm not sure if it's correct, but I tend to keep Rag as well if I already have ramp.
Mm-hmm.
So even just an Innervate. So yeah, I'd go for Wild Growth, Nourish, Innervate, and then keep nothing else apart from Rag if you already have one of those.
Mm-hmm. What's the role of Malygos against Rogue? Do we ever really get a chance to play it or utilize the big spell damage with a Moonfire, or is this kind of a card that we don't really see much when we play against Rogue?
Yeah, you don't see it much. It's pretty much a dead card.
Yeah, it's susceptible to sap.
It's all about the combo.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, the odd time you might get them down quite low, and then you happen to have Malygos and 2 Moonfires in hand. You can deal 12. Actually, that's a good point. Is planning ahead versus Rogue to try and you might just combo them for 14 even without a minion on board, because at some point against Rogue, they have so many cards that they're always going to remove whatever you play.
Mm-hmm.
So you just got to start planning how you're going to, what you need to draw into to get lethal, or when to just give up on board and just start nourishing for cards.
Yep, absolutely. Again,
it's
a kind of
a race. Yeah,
it's an economy of turns, right? We have 8 burn damage to the face possible here. We've got 14 with Force of Nature, Savage Roar. Ragnaros takes 8. Force of Nature, Savage Roar takes 9. Malygos, double Moonfire takes 9. So, we can't cast all of them in the same turn. We kind of have to, use those or deploy those, I guess, in consecutive turns if we want to burn their face down. It can feel like I need to kill the rogue's minions or whatever, but sometimes we just need to focus on their face instead.
Yeah, in the mid turns, you definitely want to remove their minions. So like playing Drake and Wrath is really strong, or even just like keep a Moonfire against an SI7 to keep that board clear. Because then one of the risks against a rogue is they play Cold Blood and Conceal, and you don't really have any counterplay to that. So you want to avoid losing in that way. So yeah, remove their board in the mid turns and then just aim for lethal. That's how I tend to play against Miracle Rogue.
Do you feel like this deck is favored over Miracle Rogue, or do you feel like it's still kind of an uphill battle for us?
When I first started playing it in the kind of the upper ranks, it was doing really well, around like 60% win rate. But I think the Miracle Rogue players sort of adapted, and it's probably around 50-50 now. Definitely haven't been having as much success against Miracle Rogue.
Yeah, it's a tough matchup and very draw dependent, I think, for both players. You're both cycling a lot of cards. There are certain situations in which we just get to kind of drop threats and ramp, nicely and easily, and certain situations where we don't. Also, rogue hands that don't get gadgets in them. So, I would say that maybe a little bit more so than the other matchups. This one is kind of is a little bit more draw dependent.
Yeah, for sure.
So how about we've already talked a little bit about combo druid, but what would we normally want to keep against combo druid, and what's our game plan?
It's quite straightforward a matchup actually. You mulligan for wild growth. If you get it, you win. If you don't, if they get it, then they win. And if neither of you get it, it's an interesting game. So, yeah.
I like that. It's funny that you said earlier that these aggro matchups are usually decided in the first two turns. You'd think two druids, it might be decided in the later turns, but it's almost always decided on turn two. Who got the wild growth? Maybe you got two of them. What about Nourish? Would you keep Nourish against a druid player if you had wild growth, and would you keep it if you didn't have wild growth?
So if I already had wild growth, yes, I would keep Nourish, I believe. And that's because you don't have so many 4 and 5 drops to play. But if you do have a choice of playing a Drake or a Nourish, then definitely play the Drake. The Druid matchup is quite tempo oriented, and you need to be quite aggressive as well. Rather than trading, just go face if at all possible. Although Drake's kind of a dangerous card to leave up, but you can't win the long game unless you really get ahead on mana and cards. Because you don't have as many threats. So fight for tempo and then go for face. It's kind of a common theme.
Yeah, maybe to put it in concrete terms, your opponent is going to play this card on turn 5, right? And we have this card. So as far as tempo is concerned, right, we really need to play, like you say, we either need to ramp harder or play more aggressively on the board to get a little damage done so that they're in face range for Force of Nature, Savage Roar. We can't play that idealized, ramp a bunch and get to 8 or 9 mana all the time, because if we don't deal with the board, we just literally don't have enough damage with our removal to actually deal with their board ever.
Yeah, I think if the opponent druid has a good hand, you probably can't win. It's too many high health taunts and things. But if they misstep, if they pass a turn or have a weak turn, then you can definitely play an Ancient of Law or something. Yeah.
All right, cool. That's a lot of information on this deck so far. So, what do you say? You want to take this one out for a spin and play a couple of games?
Sure. Yeah. How do I share my screen if we're playing on my account?
I'll just observe you on here.
Okay.
I would play against you, but I think that I've been beaten down too many times in the past by the Thunder Curve. I'm good on that for right now. All right, so while we're waiting for that game to get started, just a quick announcement for those that are watching or interested. Tomorrow night we're going to have a tournament. Are you going to be defending your tournament title tomorrow in the NA tournament?
Yeah, I signed up this morning.
Awesome.
See how we go.
Awesome. Well, I wish you luck in the tournament, and if anybody else is interested, there are sign-up details in the Discord. That link is in the description for the stream here. All right, we got a game.
Okay. I think I'm playing the version with 2 Doomsayers and no Harrison, so I can swap it out after this game.
Oh, it's fine, but it's always cool to see the tech choices as well.
Yeah, so here, this is the nuts basically. Innervate plus Nourish, the Thunder Curve as you mentioned.
Yeah, you just got it right away there.
Yeah.
Good job.
Doomsayer doesn't do much against Warrior, so the danger here is we're gonna ramp and then run out of cards. So hopefully we get a Drake or something to pair with this.
Well, Ragnaros seems like he is going to be pretty strong, and BGH is pretty much always going to get value in this matchup unless you end it, really early.
Yeah. So there's a choice here on turn 2 to Nourish. This would be a mistake. because you'll coin, Innervate, Nourish, but then you'll have nothing to play afterwards. So we're looking to Nourish on turn 3 here and save the coin for later.
You'll have to give me just a moment here. My playful sprites have disrupted Hearthstone for me, so I'm relogging in.
Okay.
But I saw the hand, and I agree with you that sometimes players get overeager to blow all of their mana right now to play Nourish, or coining out Wild Growth into like a hero power. It doesn't really make sense. Like the point of the ramp in the deck is to smooth out the turns in the future, not just ramping just because it's good in and of itself. All right, let's get back in here.
So we could play a Doomsayer, but they'll just not play their card they were going to play anyway. Probably going to be an Acolyte or something, so I don't think there's a strong enough a reason to play it. We're not too worried about them bursting us down.
Yeah, I would say, a lot of times Acolyte is a really good response, or Doomsayer is a very good response to Acolyte when it's played on turn 3. Most control warriors, I would probably say, don't play Acolyte on turn 3 without getting any draws out of it, but Doomsayer, a great response because it doesn't have any attack, right? The Acolyte can't bump into it or do anything.
And we can still play it next turn with the Nourish, if they do play Acolyte.
It's an interesting choice. Now, one thing we didn't talk about too much was the first Nourish and the second Nourish, and how those cards work well together, where if we play like a Wild Growth, we don't always use the second Wild Growth to like ramp. We may use it to cycle. And kind of the same thing with Nourish, is that we can play the first Nourish for a good amount of mana, and then we can reload our hand by just playing the second Nourish and drawing with it instead.
Yeah, we definitely want to draw with the second Nourish. We're going to be running out of cards pretty soon. The choice here is to play Doomsayer or not, so it's just going to get cleared. Next turn we'll have 6 mana, 7 with the coin. We're probably going to just Nourish the cards next turn.
It's not a card that's going to get the same kind of insane value as we normally get against like Zoo or something like that. But healing for 7 here seems reasonable. Although,
so too.
Yeah. BGH is kind of an aggressive play on the board, so I like this choice to play Doomsayer here. Waste a weapon charge too, right?
Yeah. And we don't have Harrison in the in this particular list, so.
Also kind of nice because we've seen BGH already, and we hold Rag in hand. That's convenient.
That is convenient. We're almost about to play Rag pretty soon, so. Interesting here. Could cleanly remove these, but what I really want to do is to draw into like a Drake swipe, something like that. We can always play this next turn if we don't draw into anything good.
Yep.
Or in the Rag.
Yep.
So, drawing gives us more options, and we're still at 31 HP.
Right, and Warrior, not one of those decks that's just going to run away with the board and crush us, right?
Yeah, so we've drawn the second Innervate. We definitely want to save this for combo. That's probably our win condition here, is getting our other 2 Savage Roars. He'd probably just execute this, something like that, but...
Well, we also got the Ancient of Lore next turn to cycle as well. That'll bring us up, if we play it, it'll bring us up to 10 cards in hand. So we may have to ditch a coin or something like that.
Yeah. Drake Wrath would be nice as well.
I'm not always a fan of cycling with shield block, especially if you've got a shield slam in hand. Against Druid, it can be a really nifty card. So we've got 4 chances to get either Wrath or Swipe if we play the Drake, out of 18 cards left in the deck, so it's like a 25% chance. Would you risk it with the Drake?
I wouldn't waste the Innervate on a Drake swipe. We need that for the win condition. It's a bit awkward because, as I say, if we draw with Lore, we'll just have to ditch the coin. The other thing is we could do is coin Rag now. If we clear the armor, that's quite good.
What are your thoughts on
BGH would be reasonable.
if we're going to keep Innervate to use with double combo later? That means that we'll only need one Force of Nature in hand. How do you feel about using Force of Nature here to clear the board?
Yeah, I was just about to say that's what I'm looking at doing. The Ancient of Law, we don't want to just ditch the coin, and it's just going to get cleared really easily.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the Force of Nature here. Just used as removal.
Yep, makes it a lot harder for if you play Ragnaros next turn. It's going to be a little bit harder to remove because there may not be an execute activator. We've already seen one slam come down, and we've seen maybe shield slam is the other choice, but we might blink off some of that armor.
I think I just like the Rag here. We don't mind hitting either face or the Kian.
Mm-hmm. Not really a threat of BGH either.
Yeah, we expect it to get removed, but that's fine. Yeah, Law would be the other choice.
Yeah, it's hard to justify playing the lore here just because it puts us at 10 cards, and it's difficult to figure out exactly what we would want to play after that.
I have no time for games.
Gonna steal it. Shield slam.
Let's see. Oh. Okay.
No.
Well, gotta be happy to see that card.
It's a good card. So we're actually getting quite low if we don't hit one of these minions with the Rag. I'm just seeing if we need to play any safer.
What would the safe option be here? Ancient of War, Healing Face, or Lore?
No, because that would require use of the Innervate.
Right.
So we really want to hold on to this Innervate. But yeah, I don't think there is another good way. Maybe like Force of Nature is the second one, but I think we'll just go for the Keeper. We want to Drake with it. We'll Drake first, see what we get.
Mm-hmm. That's probably not a bad card to get. If Rag misses, we take some face damage. Alright, he hit one of them. But if Rag misses and we take a bunch of face damage, the Sen'jin can help block Garrosh on the next turn. This is going to be double.
This is fine. They're probably not going to play another threat here.
Right. So we're way ahead on card advantage here. All we have to do is basically stay alive and win, right?
Yep. Swipe would be nice here. 5, 9. We could draw 2 and play a Doomsayer. Or Sen'jin Doomsayer. It's quite a nice combination.
Mm-hmm.
And then the following turn we can cleanly play a Lore on an empty board. But let's draw first.
Yeah, we have the chance to draw a swipe here. Makes that, almost makes me want to do a greedy Doomsayer play if we get swipe, but we don't have swipe.
Yeah, I like the Doomsayer Sen'jin here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in worst case scenario, if the Doomsayer gets, owled, if people even play that anymore, or if the board is, if they manage to keep this Sylvanas, she's going to have 1 health after bumping into the Sen'jin, so we can easily remove it with, like, Keeper or something.
Yeah, I thought about bumping it, but we can do that next turn with the Ancient of Law, if needed.
Mm-hmm. No, I can understand the desire to keep Innervate in the hand because it enables that 12 mana for the Force of Nature Savage Roar. What about the coin? Can we be liberal with that?
Yep, we don't need the coin for anything in particular. Actually, it might be a good play here with Keeper, because the typical Keeper targets in Control Warrior are the Kian and the Sylvanas, and they both have been played,
Right.
so we don't really need the silence effect anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll draw first. Still waiting for that second Savage Roar. And this is where they're at quite a high life total, so we're starting to think about saving Moonfire for Malygos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, setting
So
up
we'll
that.
use our keeper here.
Yeah, we can have that like 2 or 3 turn lethal where we play Malygos, a couple of Moonfires to plink off the armor, and then set ourselves up for the double roar.
I bring life.
Fine, two damage. We've got the PGH.
Yeah, not the most effective Alex I've seen. Yeah, setting us up for a really nice turn here with Ancient of Lore and BGH.
One of the things with BGH is Warrior has a Grom as well, and if you can save it, as long if you have a clean way to remove this without using BGH, I tend to prefer that. I don't think we do here, but that's a consideration, is like how we're going to clear the Grom if we use this now. And also we're at 16, so we're safe from Grom Taskmaster. We may get brawled if we play 2 minions, but I think that's fine at this stage because we're refilling our hand.
Yeah, we got a couple of minions left. We even have a little bit of cycle there with Thalnos as well.
There's the second roar.
Alright.
We're still not quite in range, so that'll be 22. We'll see what survives. Oh, 23 with the Moonfire. There's the brawl,
Alright,
so
there it is.
23 plus 9, so we can do 32. If that's 31 damage with BGH surviving.
Doesn't look like it's going to get removed here. Okay, so now we pretty much know that we're safe at least for a couple of turns, right?
Yeah. 6 cards left. So we're going to be doing quite a bit of damage with the swipes. Wonder if we can draw a swipe now. We could Thalnos swipe face, that would be really nice.
Yeah,
Let's try and go for that.
yeah, I like that. 6 cards left in the deck, 2 of them are swipes, so...
There it is.
Alright, awesome. And now we're in easy range of lethal here. We've got... well, we've got 22 with the combo, plus another 8 from BGH. Makes it 30, and if we manage to keep Thalnos on the board, that's up to 35 damage with the Moonfires.
You can see how critical keeping the Innervate was. Otherwise we'd only have 14 plus what's on the board. A Drake swipe would be nice.
Is it worth... we're at 3 cards left in deck. Is it worth wrathing this for 1 to draw out the Malygos?
Yeah, I think it's fine.
We've seen 2 executes and 2 shield slams. I don't feel like there's really much that can handle the Malygos at this point.
White and Shieldmasta. So we've only got 2 minions left to pair with our double combo now.
So we've seen 1 Taskmaster already, and we've seen 1 Whirlwind. So, okay, there's 2 Whirlwinds. So, not super duper likely, I think, to see this Grom combo. Maybe Grom is the last card in hand, but I'm not sure.
Okay, so 22, 23, 24. So I want to get the Drake on the board. We want to save our Moonfires for the Malygos in case we need the extra damage. So probably just Wrath without drawing.
Yeah, that seems reasonable to me. As much as I love wrathing for 2 and cycling a card.
Because we have no cards left in deck. We should have enough damage to finish the game now. 12 damage with the Moonfires, plus 22, 34, even if this Drake gets removed.
Alright, kind of expected there. And with all of that removal down, I would think that we can just kill the Grom with Malygos here.
Yep.
And then I also assume, yeah, Moonfire the face as well. Are there
Yeah.
any circumstances in which we want to keep that second Moonfire just because it's highly unlikely that they have anything that can deal with Malygos?
We really need the damage, and the risk is if they remove this. Well, actually, we're going to be short of damage anyway if they remove this, but they've used both executes, both shield slams. I think Tinkmaster wouldn't even be enough, because we'd have 27 with Tinkmaster, I think.
Right. I need to be like Tinkmaster, Taskmaster. Both of the T-Masters.
You can see we had quite a good hand, pretty good draw, and it was still quite touch and go with having enough threat stick. You really need to. So all we need is 1 minion to stay on the board, and then. Oops.
Yeah, but you know that one last minion just drawing them out of their ability to deal with it. Yeah, that's a really nice game. All right. So far, so good. 1 win down against Warrior. Now, you would say that that's a little bit favored. You said it was actually about 50-50 when we were talking earlier. With
Yeah.
hands like these.
If I look at my deck tracker, that's the weakest matchup for this deck is Control Warrior.
Yeah, that's always that's going to be really interesting to me, just because Druid is normally thought of as so favored.
It kind of it's backwards. Miracle Rogue would be interesting matchup.
And you mentioned the possibility of keeping Nourish against Miracle Rogue because they'll be spending a lot of time daggering. Given that we don't have the coin here, do we want to take that risk of not getting it?
So it's going to be pretty bad unless we get Innervate, but if we get Innervate, it's really good. I think on balance, I'd throw it out, try and get a wild growth.
Yeah. Even something like Wrath can be at least a little bit more useful in those early turns. You know, seeing SI or Earthen Ring early, you don't want to run the risk of those, you know, getting cold-blooded and concealed. That's, I don't think, what we wanted to see.
No. It's quite easy to improve it if we just draw into wild growth. Since we mulligan away everything, we have better chances.
Well, Wrath, not the absolute worst card in the world. At least it gives something for us to do on one of these following turns.
So this is probably going to be a loss unless they have Dead Hand as well. We really need that turn 2 wild growth. Because there's no real card we can draw into for turn 3.
Right. And no cycling ability with the Wrath either.
Yeah.
I was pretty sure that you just started with Wild Growth in every single one of your games. That's generally been my experience, so I'm surprised that this can even happen. This is like a...
Only against Touch Saw and yourself.
Alright, this is kind of one of those things we were sort of talking about earlier, as whether to play the Keeper or whether to play the Sen'jin on turn 4. What's your thought? Do you want to play neither one of those?
We need the Keeper in case of an Edwin.
Mm-hmm.
The Sen'jin, we expect it to get removed, and then so they'll go like a Dagger SI. But we do have a way to remove the SI. If we didn't have any way to remove it, I'd consider even just passing.
Mm-hmm.
Strange as that sounds, but I think it's fine here because we can remove their next threat, and it does burn some of their spells before Gadget's in.
Yeah, it just gives us something to do, right?
We also have a pretty heavy hand, so if we don't play it now, we'll probably never get to spend all our mana.
Exactly.
I think that's just a swipe. Could Wrath, Moonfire and trade. Drake, Moonfire and trade, but the 4 HP is not that great anyway.
Yeah.
And we can pair this with Wrath later.
Right. There, especially if we haven't managed, like at this point in the game, to ramp up a little bit, it's unlikely that we're ever going to be able to play Drake and swipe in the same turn. So I like this. It also leaves the option open for Drake plus Wrath if Azure Drake comes down. Gives us a little bit of leeway there.
Yep.
And we have some good damage, some, maybe other ways to remove stuff. Keeper plus Wrath, that's a lot of damage.
Yeah. Getting the face damage in is quite important too, rather than trading. Trading's not great. You want to use your spells to remove and minions to go face if you can.
Yeah. Well, kind of fortunate actually here to have the Keeper in hand, because I feel like maybe this is the read I'm getting, that there might not be a Gadget Sand in hand. Trying to cycle as much as possible here. Do you feel like this is a situation in which we want to use the Keeper to silence the Thalnos, or do we want to still keep that for Edwin?
Definitely, I think denying the draw is really valuable. Sen'jin will be useful later anyway. The question is whether we cycle ourselves. The Wrath is, I still really want to keep it for removal with Drake, or just against an SI or something. Something about silencing and just hero powering this rather than cycling. We have a good play next turn anyway, so we're not desperate for the card.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. If we ditch the Wrath this turn, there are plenty of things that we don't have an answer to next turn. So yeah, I think that keeping the Wrath in hand, being prepared to play Azure Drake plus Wrath next turn, or play Ancient of Lore if it's like Gadget Sand Conceal.
And we can remove an Edwin now with 6/6 Edwin with the Spell Power Wrath Moonfire.
Right.
I got the best deal anywhere.
Okay, so know that there's no Conceal in hand right now. That may make us a little bit more emboldened against, possible, 3-drop, 3/3 hits the board. We're probably a little bit less concerned about that 3/3 getting concealed with a Cold Blood on it.
Yeah. Let's just try and draw into combo now. Try and win in 2 turns.
Wild Growth right on time.
Oh, we're still missing the Force of Nature though.
We are.
Because that's actually, probably not for turn 8, but for this turn, 7 mana, it's often a good play to Wild Growth into 9 mana if you have combo.
Honestly, sometimes, especially against really top players, maybe ramping at 7 and representing that we have our combo in hand, even if we may not, I could see that it being strong either way.
Yeah, I mean, it's usually right to ramp, even if you don't have a follow-up play. Unless you're really short on cards, you'll save it till 10 mana.
Right.
So let's see.
So I think there are a couple of possibilities here. There's possibly a second Gadget Sand in hand, which is why this one didn't get concealed. We also know that there was no conceal earlier, so maybe it's just a raw Gadget Sand with no second Gadget Sand in hand. Are you starting to feel like Leroy Shadowstep Cold Blood might be some of the cards that are here, and so Sen'jin would be good here, or are we looking at Azure Drake?
I don't think they have quite enough mana to be worried about the 1-turn lethal. I don't think we have to play Sen'jin now. We still could play it with like a Bloodmage Wrath. The other would be establishing the Drake, but I think I like your line there.
Yeah, the downside of this, I suppose, is that we don't get to cycle a card right away. We may not, Thalnos may not even get removed, but we do keep a Thalnos on the board as well, which is always a scary card, especially in a deck with Moonfire, where we have additional sources of spells to do damage with. Those are definitely cards we like to see when Gadget Sand is not on the board, so I would say that's a success. I'm getting a real Leroy vibe from this hand here. Just... Okay. Yeah, getting a real Leroy vibe. So we're not out of the woods yet. So tough turn here. Is there anything that we can draw with Azure Drake that will help us swing the board here? We don't have any Sen'jins left. Would we ever...
No, I don't think we can draw anything
Is there...
Swipe would deal 6 damage, put them at 13, so when they're in combo range. We really want to draw into the Force of Nature if we can. Even Wrath our own minion here.
Yeah, is there ever consideration to just draw 2 with Wrath?
Yeah, that's what I'm leaning. If we play Malygos, we don't draw anything.
Right.
So if we go Drake, draw. Yeah, let's go for a Drake. We don't want to...
3 cards in a turn. Surely we're able to get something, right?
Okay, so we've now got the 22 damage if we can get that Force of Nature in hand.
Yep, this looks...
We might also die here now though.
Right.
Since we never clear the Edwin.
Yeah. That would be consistent with, I think, what our read has sort of been throughout this. But we still have... It's with 13 cards left in deck. We've got 2 copies of Force of Nature, so we got a 1 in 6 chance for an immediate out this turn. But it doesn't look like you're gonna eat the Leroy Express.
There's a second conceal.
That's what I'm thinking too. Well, I think if Leroy Cold Blood, Leroy Cold Blood was going to come down last turn, we would have seen it. That Malygos is looking pretty juicy.
Yeah, the thing, if we Wild Growth to Force of Nature, we've only got 16 damage, so that's not really a ruling out possibilities. So yeah, I can't see a way to get lethal this turn. So yeah, we'll just remove the board.
Yeah, if we had one more draw here, we'd have a chance at, Innervate with the ability to Wild Growth Innervate, and then cast the second Innervate. But yeah, this seems, very strong.
But do we want to innovate Hero Power? What's the 4 damage? 11. I don't think we need to.
I don't think that there's a situation in which that helps. And we've seen 1 Shiv already, which is the only thing that does 1. But Leroy is going to be 12 plus the dagger is 13. There's no difference between 2 health and 3 health for the most part, I think.
That was expected, so we just want to rag. Next turn and armor up. Or do we draw and rag? Oh, there we go. So we only had 11 cards left in deck with all the cycle. So
1 in 6, making it 1 in 1. Yeah, I can really see the power of what you're talking about here with holding that Innervate. I feel like this is something that I don't typically do. I don't typically hold my second Innervate or my Innervate for the double combo here.
yeah.
So yeah, that's really important.
The reason I always have double combo is because that's what I'm playing for.
Yeah. Well, it's
Yeah,
the thing is your opponent's always playing around the 14 damage, right? And any time that they're at 15 health, they're thinking that they're safe. I've also noticed that Moonfire can work with that as well. Like you beat somebody down, they cast Alex, and then you've got 15 damage with your combo, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's really nice against the Alex.
And even if we hold Innervate and we don't have the second Roar, we still have the ability to Innervate Hero Power to do an extra point of damage as well. So yeah, that's one thing I like about it is it's not the safety of exactly 14, equals dead. Instead with this deck, it's actually, it's 16 you could die to double Moonfire, 16 you could die to the extra innervated Hero Power, but always keeping that Innervate in the hand really makes that combo turn so powerful, even if we're not just using a double combo.
Yeah. We managed to beat Rogue without any ramp as well, which is surprising.
Yeah, that was...
The hand was...
Yeah, Hero Power on 2, Hero Power on 3, Sen'jin on 4, which isn't the strongest proactive play. Sometimes I really like these matchups where neither player really gets to play the deck that they wanted to, you know, and you have to make a lot of those difficult decisions. So that was a really cool game. All right.
What are you thinking of? Yeah.
Well, you'd mentioned that ditch the Doomsayer. You'd mentioned that maybe sometimes we keep Nourish with coin, although without wild growth, it might be a little unrealistic. So I think ditch the Doomsayer. I would think, you know, probably ditch the Drake. You'd mentioned also maybe keeping Ancient of Lore in these slower matchups.
Yeah.
So I could see keeping Nourish and Ancient of Lore.
It's actually, yeah. If we coin Nourish on turn 4, we can play Lore immediately the next turn.
Right, exactly. And like we were saying earlier, it's so important to just smooth out the curve later on to ensure you have something to play. And yeah, going in from 4 to 7 mana is perfect.
It's a pretty strong hand.
Mm-hmm. Just pick up a wild growth next turn and we're all set.
Can play the Doomsayer with the Nourish later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no real reason to play it without like a Acolyte or an Armor Smith to deal with there.
Mm.
And Warrior, you know, with the limited amount of high quality removal that they have, they're not really trying to, you know, spend 7 damage or an execute to kill a Doomsayer, right?
I think I'm thinking about removing this. It's kind of dangerous to give them too much card draw.
Do you feel like Wrath will give them a card? Do you feel like Doomsayer might be better here just because it denies them a draw, and if they do want to draw off of it, they're going to have to use like Whirlwind without executing something?
Yeah, or a Taskmaster, and they get one draw anyway, but then lose 2 minions.
Right.
So,
right.
yeah, I think you might be right. The Doomsayer might be the better removal here. Yeah, it gives us the opportunity to cycle this in future.
Mm-hmm.
Doomsayer won't really get any more value. So.
Right. And if we're looking for that double combo, especially if we're ramping with Nourish, although we have plenty of cards in hand, never hurts to cycle a little bit more, right? Plus spell damage, plus Wrath. You know, if they're playing Drakes, it can be strong.
If they execute this, it's not really a problem either.
Right.
But, yeah, so they burned a Slam. Alright, now we execute the ramp play.
Yeah, this is a dream here. I could see the benefit of keeping Doomsayer for this turn also. You know, there's something nice about ramping up and then feeling like you get to drop an uncontested Ancient of Lore onto the board. Alright. Kind of a...
So do we care about this card? Because we do have the option to remove it with Drake Wrath.
Yeah.
Just drop down Lore and they'll...
I mean, it does feel kind of bad dropping the Lore and then, you know, having it get cleared off. But I might be in favor of the Drake Wrath. You know, probably most common scenario there is that they're going to play Fiery War Axe and have 4 mana left over.
Yeah. I think I'm leaning towards the Lore. I just want to draw, and the Drake's really useful with a Swipe later to get through half of Cairn or something like that.
Yeah, or Baron Geddon as well.
It's pretty close, but having a 4/2 Drake's not that strong.
Yeah, and I like what you said earlier too about these bigger minions. When someone plays one of those big minions like Alex or something, you'd prefer not to use your premium removal on those first. You'd prefer to keep BGH in hand or something like that. So, yeah, holding on to, you know, Wrath and Drake and Swipe means that Baron Geddon is, you know, not going to have to be targeted by BGH. Strange choice not to clear the 5/5 there with the Abomination.
Think about just using a Wrath to remove half of that with the trade.
We've also got those 2 Moonfires in hand. I'm not sure that we can really use them right now, but they, may come in handy with this Drake as well.
Yeah, I might just drop the Sen'jin afterwards. Sen'jin Wrath, hero powered. Could use one Innervate, because we do have a second one.
Yeah.
It's not that clean.
Yeah. Well, this engine lines up nicely with the board. That's what I like about this line. Is that
Next turn, yeah.
Yeah, like they have to find one extra source of damage in order to take this card down.
They play, yeah. They can't play Geddon now either on curve, although we did have an answer for it.
Right.
If they play a weapon, we can just Drake swipe. Kind of running low on cards.
Right.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah, having those 2 Moonfires in hand isn't super helpful. But if we do draw Malygos, that's like instant, ability to kind of control the board and clear off whatever big minions they have.
Yeah, we definitely want to cycle with this.
Right. Do we want to play the Drake right now, or do we want to, are we thinking of like an even more conservative line?
Could we hero power? There's no point in dealing 2 damage to the Armorsmith.
Right, it's like kind of awkward because
first, yeah.
Yeah, if we want to cycle with Wrath, then it's not that useful to hero power here to clear off the 4/1. I would assume we probably want to kill the Armorsmith too.
You're talking about the swipe play?
Well, my concern with the swipe play is that we might run into trouble against Baron Geddon. Is that we don't have a ready removal source for that. Alright, well, we got a little bit more cycling. Sometimes that's kind of the point of drawing cards when our hand isn't great, is that we just draw into more card draw. Give ourselves something to do on each one of these turns, like play a minion and then cycle some.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was the best play we could have made on that turn, but it didn't feel very strong, but anyway, that's what we've...
Yeah, the swipe, I mean, it's a board that was kind of begging for swipe, but at the same time, yeah, I'm not sure that we have a perfect way to deal with some of those bigger minions. We do have a BGH. Now, we kind of know that the Ragnaros is going to get removed here if we play it right.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the swipe, Sen'jin hero power, and save the rag for a juicier target. Like if they drop a rag, we can counter rag. It does give them a bit of extra armor,
right,
which is unfortunate.
Right, and with 5 cards in hand, there's some decent threats they can put on the board. We may not necessarily be able to just put a few minions down and plink their armor off over a couple turns.
Yeah, the rag's quite not ideal if they just have an Armorsmith on board, because if it hits that, you've wasted 8 damage on an Armorsmith.
Yeah. Yeah, with 2 executes left in hand, 1 shield slam left in hand, and 12 armor up, it just feels like Ragnaros would be. And we haven't seen BGH either. Although, we may not see BGH because we've seen an Abomination. And I would presume that this is a warrior deck that's more geared toward facing the Zoo matchup than it is dealing with, regular decks. All the mana in the world and nowhere to go with it.
We'll draw first.
Do you feel like since we have 2 Innervates in hand, it's possible to play Rag, Innervate, BGH here, and then swing into the Armorsmith, get a guaranteed 8 damage off?
That would be overcommitting against a brawl if we had 3 I'm thinking about just playing Rag and trading and saving the BGH.
Interesting.
We could just, yeah, we'll draw first if we have something to pair with the BGH.
Yeah.
Have a
Right.
draw.
Alright, so one away from a double combo here.
Time waits for no one.
That's definitely trading there. Taking to 5 armor. Got him. Yeah, we'll play the Rag here.
Alright, YOLO Rag. Let's see it. Oh,
Here we
nice
go.
shot. Nice shot. I thought only the diamond one you got to choose the target.
Yeah. So we still have the BGH next turn if it had missed.
Yeah, I mean, I like this approach too. Just like we were talking about earlier. Save the really premium stuff that we know will get value against those big minions. Save that BGH until it actually matters.
Really dry on cards now.
Yeah, do you feel like, since both sides are kind of running out of resources here, that it might be prudent to use the Keeper to silence the Acolyte, or are you...
Definitely, yeah. I think we want to clear with Force of Nature and Keeper.
Yeah. Yeah, we still got another Force of Nature in the deck, and it's not like we need to play this combo anytime soon. The opponent's at 44 life.
Exactly.
Not life doesn't really matter if they don't control the board, right?
Yep. So we'll clear this first. This is quite annoying for the warrior to have 2 medium-sized minions there.
Right, exactly.
I probably play, what's that card? Cleave. Probably got
Yeah.
Cleave in this list.
Yeah. When you see the A-bomb, you know that there's probably something like Cleave hidden in there. Maybe even 2 copies of it.
I bring life.
Cool, so that now we have the BGH.
Yeah, this is the second instance of a not super effective Alex Draza against us. Another thing that I tend to think of when I'm playing against Control Warrior is that you can basically waste your first 15 HP face tanking whatever you need to face tank, because at some point they're going to want to play Alex anyway. So, you know, this is pretty much a perfect example in the first game that we played too, where Alex did 2 points of damage the first game and did like 1 point of damage this game.
So we've got 10 cards in deck and 5 of them draw more cards. So 50% chance of getting some card draw.
There's one of them.
There we go.
Alright, and that's a good one too, right? Because we get the swipe off with it. Alright, Malygos, pretty good card to see. At least it gives us something to do on a turn.
Could play around the brawl by trading here, but we're getting quite low as well if they do the
Yeah.
Taskmaster. So I think, although they'll probably have a brawl here, I think we'll do it anyway.
Do you ever get fancy and keep like Malygos double Innervate for Malygos swipe? Or is that just like so unrealistic that there's no reason to do that?
It's pretty, yeah, I wouldn't especially try and save them for that, but if it does happen, definitely it's a good play. If you do happen to have those 4 cards in hand.
Yeah, 6 damage to a board is pretty good, but yeah, not too many instances in which we can use it against anybody other than maybe like Priest.
So that is passed here, so we really have no reason to do anything to commit anymore, because they couldn't answer this. Playing Malygos would be a big mistake here. In my view.
Do you ever consider Thalnos here?
Unless we have lethal. Hang on. 8, 16, 18, plus 18 plus 16, 34, 35, 36, I think. If we innovate the
That's, yes, super
Thalnos as well.
super close, but still a couple points off. Yeah.
So you're saying, should we play the Thalnos?
Well, the question for me is, like, it's got only a 1 in 4 chance to survive on the board. So even against Brawl, it might not be the worst. You know, considering Brawl's going to get good value against our board anyway.
I think I wouldn't play it, and this can deal 5 damage with a the combo.
Hmm.
If it's on board later on. Yeah, like if they play something like this.
Right. Yeah. We can even, if we get a dud draw here, we can even put Thalnos on and let it die to the A-bomb.
So is this lethal now? We've got 6 and 6. 12 plus they'll do 2 damage to themselves. 13, 14. 14 plus 14 is 28.
Yeah, well, they got the A-bomb that's going to kill our BG.
Yeah, I didn't count this damage. I think it's 28. Let's double check. So 4, 6. So we got 12 with the Savage Roar.
Yep.
13, 14 with the Abomination, and 14 with the Moonfire. So it's 28. Yeah, we don't have enough to play Savage Roar, Malygos, and Thalnos, do we?
No.
Waits for no one.
9.
11, 14. Oh, we do.
Yeah, we do. Yep.
Okay. Oh no, we don't. What have I done?
Wait, what? 9 plus 11.
Oh, that was a misstep by. I
We're
played it out of
smart.
sequence.
Oh, yeah.
I played the Innervates
Oh, at
before the
very beginning,
Malygos.
Yeah.
Oops.
You know what? You get rewarded with a Nourish to draw into whatever you need to finish the game. We still got a force of nature left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was lethal, but I messed up the ordering.
Yeah. I've played a lot of Druid games myself, and I have definitely done that with Lightning Bloom a lot of times. Well,
Yeah.
it seems like Nourish, is going to save us. It's going to find our Force of Nature next turn. We've got 4 cards left in deck. There's no chance not to have Force of Nature then.
Yeah. Just pop the Doomsayer here.
Yeah, because Sunwalker is something, or, given that this deck is kind of an anti-aggro warrior, I would assume that Sunwalker's in there somewhere. Or
They've already
any other
played
top.
Alex.
Yeah, exactly. Even shield block plus hero power here, that's 14. It's not enough. And they've already played 1 shield block as well, and both armor smiths, so no way to gain armor. I have a feeling those last cards are Grom and Taskmaster.
It was fortunate that still able to get the victory even after that. Pretty bad misplay, but the important thing is that we didn't miss the lethal.
Yeah.
We didn't miss spotting it.
yeah. It's a small victory for boomers everywhere there. Just being able to actually do the math. Awesome. Well, those were 3 great games, or was it 4? 4 great games. Yeah, that was really awesome to watch. I have to say, after having played a pretty decent amount of this deck myself, my approach was a little bit different, and I think that I can see some of the instances in which I've been struggling to successfully execute this deck's game plan. I can definitely see the differences between your play and what I've been trying to do, and I appreciate the insights on like what we use for mulligan choices. I think in the past I typically would keep Nourish almost every time against Warrior. I don't think I've ever kept an Ancient of Lore in my starting hand, so kind of being exposed to that as a possibility to keep, and then also just this idea of keeping the Innervate, getting so much more value out of turn 10 than trying to squeeze stuff into the board when we don't really have enough creatures to justify that.
Yeah, that's the key difference with combo druid. I think is that use of Innervate. But I mean, this is just how I play the deck and my style. So I definitely don't think it's 100% optimal.
That it's interesting you mentioned that. That's one thing that Talk said the last time we were doing one of these spotlights, was the same thing where he's like, I'm not like 100% sure this is the best perfect deck list for this, or that this is the exact way to play. There are some interesting rules, like his Worgen Warrior never hero power, which is something I wouldn't really think of. But it does impress upon me just how even the top players that are playing Classic are still, humble in their own opinions, saying maybe this is correct, maybe it's not correct. It's like, it's hard to really have any hard and fast rules that we can use to describe these decks and the way that they play. And there are a couple different strategic ways to play, similar to like mid shaman, how often you cast your use your hero power, things like that. So
Right.
yeah, I love hearing the humility there, and it also leaves it open for other players to interpret this deck or change a couple of things and kind of go their own path with it as well.
Yeah, it's really amazing, and a mode like Classic's been out for so long, and the decks are all quite well known. But if you just change one card out of 30, it can completely change how the deck should be played.
Right.
So there's so much depth to the game, even though it's limited in the card pool and the classes and things.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well, similar to a game like Brood War, we kind of mentioned Brood War at the beginning, but for those who aren't familiar with the game, Brood War, the last patch that came out was in like 1999, and the professional community has continued to persevere. There's still large professional events for Brood War, and despite the fact that the game hasn't been patched in that long, the meta continues to evolve in it. For like 20 years, the meta continues to evolve in that game, and it's a testament to the strength of the game design and everything. But I feel sort of the same way about Classic Mode's Eternal format, where we don't no matter how much time you spend in a format, there are probably still going to be unexplored archetypes, unexplored tech choices, cards that people just immediately discount as being bad. And at the time that these classic decks were played, there were people that had some very wrong ideas about them, and then we see 8 years later, people making improvements on them and refining the decks into something that's much better. And I would look forward to maybe in the next couple of years, we probably still see refinements on the current meta that we're seeing as well. So always really interesting to see the evolutions in the game, and I have a feeling that there are probably other improvements that could be made on this deck in the future as well, that other smart players might come in and have a completely different take on some of those tech slots as well.
absolutely, and yeah, very well said. Yeah.
So I got to say, I learned a lot. This was a deck that has really stuck out to me. Just losing to it on the ladder against you, but also just watching it in a tournament setting, watching your strategic takes on this deck, and also just I drew a deck that doesn't just plop down big guys every single turn. It's been a really educational experience. So I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to explain to us exactly how this deck works, and hopefully for the folks out there watching, could also get some tips on maybe how to play this deck or bring it to a tournament as well.
Yeah, my pleasure, and see you in the tournament tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. Bright and oh no, not this one's not bright and early, but yeah, we'll look forward to that tournament. For those of you who are interested, we've got our NA tournament happening tomorrow. You're the reigning champion, Thunder. It would be awesome to see you repeat that. I know that I'll be rooting for you as well. You've made a fan out of me after the last one. So I think we'll stop it there. And once again, thanks. I really appreciate you taking your time. Have a good night, everyone.